Hello, my friend. Welcome to your sleep story. My name is Padraig, and I am an Irish storyteller. Tonight, I have a story for you that came to me on a quiet afternoon, much like the one in our tale. I was sitting by my window watching a soft, steady rain fall upon the garden, and I was struck by how the world can seem to slow down, to grow quieter and more thoughtful, under the gentle percussion of 1,000 tiny raindrops. It is a story about a quiet man in a quiet town, and how the smallest and most unexpected moments of connection can fill the empty spaces we sometimes feel inside. It is a story about the comfort of a warm room on a gray day, the steady ticking of a clock, and the simple, profound kindness of a shared cup of tea. So find your comfortable place, let the world outside fade away, and allow the sound of the rain in our story to wash over you. But before our story begins, let us take a moment to settle in, to let go of the day that has been, and to prepare our minds and our bodies for a deep and peaceful rest. We will do this together with a simple countdown from 10 down to 1. With each number, we will release a little more, sink a little deeper, and grow a little quieter. There's nowhere else you need to be now, nowhere to go, no obligations. This time is just for you. Let us begin. Music, 10. Feel the solid surface beneath you. Whether it is a bed or a chair, feel it holding you, supporting you completely. Imagine the strength of the floor beneath that, and the solid earth beneath the floor. You are held. You are supported. You are safe. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to hold on to. Just allow yourself to be held by the stillness of this moment. Feel the weight of your body sinking gently downwards, a comfortable, reassuring weight. 9. My voice will be your guide tonight, a kind and gentle friend, here to walk with you into the quiet lands of sleep. There is no need to try too hard to listen. Simply allow the words to wash over you like a gentle stream. If your mind wanders, that is perfectly all right. Just gently guide it back to the sound of my voice or to the feeling of your own breath. You are safe here, and you are in good company. 8. Bring a gentle awareness to your body and to your breath. Notice the quiet rhythm of your breathing, the gentle rise and fall of your chest or your belly. Without changing a thing, just observe it. Now, let's take a slow, deep breath in, filling your lungs with calm, fresh air. And as you breathe out, release it with a soft sigh, letting go of any tension you might be holding in your shoulders, your jaw, or your hands. Let's do that once more. A deep, nourishing breath in, and a long, slow, gentle breath out. Feel your muscles softening, your body growing heavier and more relaxed with each exhale. 7. Notice any thoughts that may be drifting through your mind. Worries about tomorrow, memories of yesterday. See them not as problems to be solved, but simply as thoughts, like clouds passing through a starlit sky, or like leaves on a moonlit river. Acknowledge them without judgment, and then let them float on by. You can return to them tomorrow if you wish, but for now, they have no power. Tonight is for rest. Tonight is for peace. Let them go. 6. Remind yourself that in this moment, there is nothing you need to do, no tasks to complete, no expectations to meet. The day is done. Whatever has been, has been. Whatever will be, will be. Right now, your only job is to rest, to be still, to allow yourself this precious time of quiet and comfort. Give yourself permission to completely let go of all responsibilities. They will be there for you in the morning, after a night of deep, restorative sleep. 5. Connect with the feeling of peace that already exists within you. It may be quiet, it may be faint, but it is always there. It is a steady, warm light in the very center of your being, a constant, accessible friend. With each breath you take, imagine that you're breathing into that space of inner peace, helping it to grow a little brighter, a little warmer, and with each breath out, imagine that gentle warmth spreading throughout your entire body, from the tips of your toes to the crown of your head. 4. Bring to mind something simple for which you are grateful. It does not need to be grand or profound. Perhaps it is the feeling of your soft blanket, the comfort of your pillow, the quiet of your room. Perhaps it is the thought of a loved one, or the simple fact of your own body, breathing and resting. Hold that small feeling of gratitude in your heart for a moment. Let its gentle warmth fill you. Gratitude is the softest pillow upon which to rest your head. 3. Allow your imagination to begin to awaken. We are about to step into our story, into a small, cozy village square under a soft, persistent rain. Begin to imagine the sounds, the gentle patter of raindrops on cobblestones, the distant comfort and tick-tock of a clock. Imagine the feeling of being wrapped in a warm blanket, safe and dry indoors while the world outside is washed clean. Allow your mind to become a canvas, ready to be painted with the images and feelings of our story. 2. Let's take one final scan of your body, searching for any last pockets of tension. Start with your toes and feet, and just let them go completely limp. Move up to your legs, your hips, your belly, and let them be soft and heavy. Release your back, your shoulders. Let your arms be heavy at your sides. Unclench your jaw, soften the tiny muscles around your eyes. Let your whole body feel wonderfully heavy, wonderfully relaxed, sinking deeper and deeper into comfort. 1. You are ready now. Ready to drift. Ready to dream. Let go completely. Let the story carry you. Let my voice be the gentle current that guides you towards the peaceful shores of sleep, completely letting go. Our story began in the village of Oak Haven, a place that seemed to have been overlooked by the hurried pace of the modern world. It was a village of crooked-roofed cottages, a meandering stream spanned by a stone bridge green with moss, and a central square paved with cobblestones that had been worn smooth by generations of footsteps. And in the very heart of this square, in a narrow, two-story building tucked between the bakery and the wool shop, was the shop of Mr. Arthur Pumble. Arthur was a watchmaker and a clockmaker, and a mender of all things that ticked and chimed. His shop was not merely a place of business, it was his world. The sign above his door, painted in faded gold leaf, simply read, "Pumble and Time." It was a quiet joke his father had made when he first opened the shop, and Arthur had never found a reason to change it. Time, after all, was his constant companion. On this particular Tuesday, a soft and steady rain had been falling since dawn. It was not a dramatic storm, but a gentle, persistent drizzle that hushed the world, wrapping the village in a blanket of gray light and quiet sound. The rain fell on the slate roofs, creating a sound like 1,000 soft whispers. It trickled down the leaded glass of Arthur's shop window, distorting the view of the square into a watery, impressionistic painting. The cobblestones outside glistened like polished river stones, their colors deepened to rich shades of charcoal, slate and mossy green. Inside, the shop was a haven of warmth and order. The air smelled of old wood, brass polish, and the faint, clean scent of lubricating oil. It was a smell that Arthur associated with peace and purpose. The walls were lined with clocks of every conceivable size and shape. There were grandfather clocks that stood like silent, solemn butlers in the corners, their pendulums swinging in slow, hypnotic arcs. There were cuckoo clocks from the Black Forest, their little carved birds waiting patiently behind their wooden doors. And there were countless mantel clocks, carriage clocks, and wall clocks, each with its own unique voice. The combined ticking of them all was not a cacophony, as one might expect. Instead, it was a gentle, layered sound, a soft, mechanical symphony that had been the soundtrack to Arthur's entire life. He could pick out the deep, resonant talk of the mahogany grandfather clock by the door, the brisk, cheerful tick-tick-tick of the little brass carriage clock on his workbench, and the slow, deliberate thump-thump of the ancient wall clock his own grandfather had built. To Arthur, it was not noise. It was the sound of time itself breathing. Arthur sat at his workbench, a pool of warm yellow light from his angle-poised lamp falling on his hands. He was a man who seemed to match his surroundings. His hair was the color of silver dust, and his face was a map of fine lines, etched not by worry, but by decades of quiet concentration. He wore a tweed waistcoat over a soft cotton shirt, and on his nose perched a pair of delicate, wire-rimmed spectacles. In his hand, he held a tiny pair of tweezers, and through the magnifying loupe pressed to his right eye, the inner workings of a pocket watch looked like a miniature city of gleaming gears and ruby jewels. He worked with a slow, deliberate grace. His movements were small and precise, honed by more than 50 years of practice. He nudged a minuscule gear into place, his breath held steady, clear's throat. The gear clicked softly, a sound of perfect alignment that brought a faint, satisfied smile to his lips. He was repairing the watch for Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife. Its heart had stopped beating, she had said, her voice full of concern, as if speaking of a living creature. Arthur understood. To him, these little machines did have a sort of life, a duty to mark the moments that made up the lives of the people in this village. The rain pattered against the window pane, a soft and constant rhythm that complemented the ticking of the clocks. Usually, the square would have a gentle hum of activity, even on a damp day. The baker's van making a delivery, the chatter of neighbors meeting under the awning of the grocer's, the sound of children's boots splashing in puddles. But today, the rain had driven everyone indoors. The square was empty, save for a few determined pigeons huddled under the eaves of the town hall. Arthur paused his work, removing the loupe from his eye. The world snapped back to its normal size. He looked out through the rain-streaked window. The wool shop opposite had a warm glow in its window, but he could see no customers inside. The bakery, usually bustling, was quiet. The rain had drawn a curtain of solitude over Oakhaven. A feeling, faint and formless as mist, settled in his chest. It was not sadness, not exactly. It was a kind of quiet emptiness. He was a man accustomed to solitude, and indeed he usually cherished it. His work required it. But today, the quiet of the shop felt different. It echoed the quiet of the village outside. The ticking of the clocks, usually so comforting, seemed to be marking a time that was empty, a succession of moments with nothing in them. He sighed, a soft sound that was lost in the gentle symphony of his clocks. He stood up, his joints making a small creak of protest, and walked over to the shop's front door. He opened it just a crack, letting in a draft of cool, damp air that smelled of wet earth and stone. The sound of the rain was clearer now, a gentle, insistent drumming on the canvas awning above his door. It was a lonely sound, he thought. He looked up and down the square. The houses and shops seemed to be huddling together against the weather, their chimneys puffing out soft plumes of gray smoke like old men clearing their throats. The world was painted in shades of gray, from the pearl gray of the sky to the slate gray of the roofs. It was beautiful in a melancholy sort of way, but the beauty was a solitary one. He was about to close the door and return to the warm pool of light at his workbench when a flicker of movement caught his eye. Across the square, emerging from the narrow lane beside the old post office, were two figures. A woman holding a large, dark green umbrella that seemed to fight against a sudden gust of wind, and a small child, bundled in a bright yellow raincoat, holding tightly to her hand. They were hurrying, their heads bowed against the rain, which had suddenly decided to fall with a little more conviction. The woman's umbrella bucked and strained, and for a moment it looked as if it might turn inside out and fly away. They were making for the covered walkway by the town hall, but it was still some distance away. Arthur watched them, a passive observer behind his door. Then another gust of wind, stronger this time, tore through the square. It caught the green umbrella and, with a sudden, violent wrench, ripped it from the woman's grasp. It cartwheeled through the air for a moment, a wounded bird, before landing in a large puddle in the center of the square with a sad splash. The woman and child stopped, exposed to the now heavy rain. The little one in the yellow coat looked up at the sky, their small face tilted, letting the drops fall on it. The woman, however, looked dismayed. She pulled the hood of her coat over her head and tried to shelter the child with her body, looking around for the nearest refuge. Arthur's shop, with its warm glowing window and its sturdy canvas awning, was the closest. Their eyes met across the glistening cobblestones. For a moment, nobody moved. Arthur was not a man for spontaneous action. His life was ordered, predictable. Strangers rarely came into his shop unless they had a broken timepiece. But there was something in the woman's expression, a mixture of frustration and weariness that stirred something in him. It was the simple, universal plight of being caught in the rain. Before he had even fully formed the thought, he found himself pushing the door open wider. The little bell above it gave a cheerful, welcoming jingle. He stepped out from the warmth of his shop and stood under the shelter of his awning. He raised a hand, a small, hesitant gesture. "Here," he called out, his voice feeling rusty from disuse. "You can shelter here. Come in, out of the rain." The woman looked surprised, then relieved. A small, grateful smile touched her lips. She took the child's hand, and they hurried across the remaining distance, their boots making soft, splashing sounds on the wet stones. They scurried under the awning, bringing with them the fresh, cold scent of the rain. "Oh, thank you," the woman said, shaking the water from her coat. "The wind just took it. One moment I had it, the next it was gone." She was younger than Arthur had first thought, perhaps in her late 20s with kind eyes and damp hair plastered to her forehead. The child, a little girl with big, curious brown eyes and cheeks pink from the cold, looked up at Arthur. She was clutching a small stuffed bear, which was almost as damp as she was. She did not seem upset by the rain at all. She looked at the whole situation as a grand adventure. "It's no trouble at all," Arthur said, feeling a strange awkwardness. He was used to the quiet company of his clocks, not of people. "Please, come inside. You'll catch a chill out here. You can wait until it eases up a bit." He held the door open for them, and they stepped inside. The warm, ticking air of the shop enveloped them. The little girl's eyes went wide as she took in the sight of all the clocks. Her mouth formed a perfect, silent O of wonder. The mother, whose name Arthur would learn was Eleanor, looked around with a gentle appreciation. "What a wonderful place," she said softly, her voice full of genuine admiration. "It's like stepping into a storybook." Arthur felt a faint flush of pleasure. He had never thought of his shop in that way, but now, seeing it through her eyes, he could understand. It was a little pocket of the past, a room full of captured moments. "Thank you," he murmured, closing the door and shutting out the sound of the rain once more. The quiet of the shop returned, but now it was a different kind of quiet. It was a shared quiet, filled with the soft sounds of their breathing and the dripping of water from their coats onto the worn wooden floorboards. Eleanor helped her daughter, whose name was Lily, out of her bright yellow raincoat. Underneath, she wore a hand-knitted blue jumper. Arthur noticed that the stuffed bear Lily was holding had one of its button eyes hanging by a thread. Lily held it up. "Barnaby is very wet," she announced to Arthur in a solemn, clear voice. "I see that," Arthur said, his lips twitching into a small smile. "I expect he'll need to dry out by a fire." He gestured towards the back of the shop, where a small electric heater with imitation glowing coals gave off a comforting warmth. "You can put your coats over the chair there. They'll be dry in no time." As Eleanor draped their coats, Arthur felt a sudden, pressing need to do something more. It was not enough to simply offer them shelter. The quiet ritual of his day had been broken, and a new, unwritten one had begun. Would you care for a cup of tea?" he asked, the words feeling clumsy on his tongue. "It's no trouble. The kettle is always ready." Eleanor's face brightened. "Oh, that would be lovely. Truly. Thank you so much." "And for you, little one?" Arthur asked, looking down at Lily, who was now standing mesmerized before the large grandfather clock by the door, her head tilted back to look up at its wise old face. "Could Barnaby have some tea?" she asked, without looking away from the clock. Eleanor laughed softly. "Perhaps some warm milk instead, Lily, if it's not too much to ask," she said to Arthur. "Not at all," he replied. And for the first time that day, the quiet of his routine felt not empty, but pleasantly full. He retreated to the small kitchenette he kept behind a curtained alcove at the back of the shop. As he filled the kettle, he could hear the soft murmur of Eleanor's voice and the occasional, delighted gasp from Lily as she discovered a new clock. The sounds were alien in this space, yet they felt right. They felt warm. The kettle began to hiss and rumble, a comforting, domestic sound that seemed to settle the room. Arthur took down 3 mugs from a shelf. 2 were his usual plain white ones, but the third was a smaller one, a relic from his own childhood, with a faded picture of a rabbit on it. He had not looked at it in years. He poured the steaming water into a small brown teapot, the fragrant steam of Earl Grey filling the small space. He warmed some milk in a saucepan for Lily, pouring it carefully into the rabbit mug and adding a tiny spoonful of sugar. When he returned, carrying the mugs on a small wooden tray, he found Eleanor sitting in the worn leather armchair he kept for the rare customer who chose to wait. Lily was now on her knees on the floor, her face pressed close to the glass of a low mantel clock, watching its polished brass pendulum swing back and forth, back and forth. Her focus was absolute, her wonder pure. "Here we are," Arthur said softly, placing the tray on a small cluttered table he had hastily cleared. He handed the rabbit mug to Lily, who took it with both hands, her eyes finally leaving the pendulum. "The rabbit is having a carrot," she observed, pointing at the faded illustration. "Yes, he is," Arthur agreed. "He's a very hungry rabbit." He passed a cup of tea to Eleanor, who cradled it in her hands, letting the warmth seep into her cold fingers. "This is so incredibly kind of you," she said, her gaze soft and sincere. "You've saved our afternoon." "It's nothing," Arthur said, though it did not feel like nothing. It felt significant. He sat on his workbench stool, holding his own warm mug, and watched them. For a few moments, the only sounds were the ticking of the clocks, the gentle patter of the rain outside, and the soft sips of tea and warm milk. It was a comfortable silence, a world away from the empty silence he had felt just a short while ago. Lily, having finished her milk, put the mug down carefully and turned her attention back to her damp bear. She held it up for Arthur to see, her expression serious. "His eye is wobbly." Arthur leaned closer, peering at the bear. The black button eye was indeed hanging by a single, frayed black thread. With every movement it dangled precariously. "So it is," he said. "He must have had a bit of a shock, flying through the rain like that." "Can you fix him?" Lily asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Mummy says you fix things." Arthur looked from the little girl's earnest face to the worn, well-loved bear. He looked at the tiny, dangling eye. His work was with gears and springs, with cold, precise metal. He had not sewn on a button in, well, he could not remember how long, but he could not bring himself to say no. The hopeful trust in her eyes was a force more powerful than any mainspring. "I believe," he said slowly, a smile forming, "that I might have the right tools for just such an operation. A wobbly eye is a very serious condition, you see. It requires a specialist." Lily's eyes lit up. Eleanor watched them, her expression warm and amused. Arthur stood and went to a small wooden cabinet where he kept various supplies. He rummaged for a moment, past tiny screws and polishing cloths, until he found what he was looking for. A small, forgotten sewing kit his wife had tucked away there years and years ago. He opened the little tin box. Inside were a few spools of thread, a thimble, and a small collection of needles nestled in a scrap of red felt. He selected a sturdy black thread and a needle with an eye large enough for him to see. He returned to his workbench, gesturing for Lily to bring the patient over. She carefully placed Barnaby the bear on the leather surface, right next to the disassembled pocket watch. The juxtaposition was comical. The soft, squishy toy next to the intricate, glittering mechanism. "Now then, Barnaby," Arthur said, adjusting his spectacles, "this won't hurt a bit." He threaded the needle, a task that took him a few tries, his large, steady fingers feeling clumsy with this unfamiliar task. Snorts. Lily watched, her chin resting on the edge of the workbench, her breathing soft and even. She did not say a word, completely captivated by the delicate procedure. Arthur carefully pushed the needle through the worn fabric of the bear's face, pulling the loose button tight. He looped the thread through it again and again, creating a series of small, neat stitches to secure it. He worked with the same quiet concentration he gave to the most expensive timepiece. He wanted it to be strong. He wanted it to last. Finally, he knotted the thread, snipped the end with a tiny pair of scissors from his toolkit, and sat back. "There," he announced, "good as new, perhaps even better." Lily gently poked the newly secured eye. It was firm, solid. She picked up the bear and gave it a fierce hug. Then she looked up at Arthur, and her face was illuminated with a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "Thank you, Mr. Clockman," she whispered. "You are very welcome, Lily," Arthur replied, and his heart felt strangely full, as if a gear that had been stuck for a long time had just clicked gently back into place. Eleanor had been watching the entire exchange, her teacup resting in its saucer. "That was a lovely thing to do," she said. Arthur just shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. He turned his attention back to the clocks, feeling the need to ground himself in the familiar. "She seems to like them," he said, nodding towards the walls of ticking faces. "She's fascinated by how things work," Eleanor explained, "always taking things apart, though not always successfully putting them back together." This was something Arthur understood perfectly. "That is how one learns," he said. He looked at Lily, who was now pointing out different clocks to her bear, explaining their functions in a soft, serious monologue. Would she like to see one work? Before Eleanor could answer, Lily's head popped up. "See one work?" she echoed, her interest piqued. Arthur smiled. He stood and walked over to one of the cuckoo clocks hanging on the wall. It was a charming piece, carved from dark wood, with a little chalet, pine trees, and a water wheel. He carefully opened the small glass door on its face and moved the minute hand forward. He moved it past the half-hour mark, and then slowly, carefully, towards the hour. As the hand clicked over to the 12, there was a whirring sound from within the clock, a moment of mechanical anticipation. Then, a tiny wooden door above the clock face sprang open, and a little painted bird on a wooden arm shot out. "Cuckoo! Cuckoo! Cuckoo!" it chirped, its beak opening and closing with each call. Lily let out a gasp of pure delight. She clapped her hands together, her eyes sparkling. Even Eleanor was smiling broadly. The cheerful, silly sound echoed in the quiet shop, a burst of unexpected joy. When the bird had finished its song and retreated back into its house, the little door snapping shut behind it, Lily looked at Arthur as if he were a magician. "Again," she pleaded, and so he did it again. And then he showed her another clock, a beautiful French mantel clock which played a delicate, tinkling melody on the hour, its notes like falling raindrops made of crystal. He wound up a small automaton of a blacksmith whose hammer struck a tiny anvil with a satisfying tink, tink, tink. Each new wonder was met with the same wide-eyed amazement from the little girl. Arthur found himself talking more than he had in weeks. He explained how a pendulum keeps time, how a spring stores energy, how the gears work together like a team of tiny dancers. He spoke in simple terms, but he did not speak down to her. He spoke to her as a fellow enthusiast, one professional sharing the secrets of his craft with another. And Lily listened, rapt, occasionally asking a surprisingly insightful question, like, "Does the cuckoo get tired?" As he spoke, he felt the dusty corners of his own passion being swept clean. He was reminded of the magic that had first drawn him to this work as a boy, in this very shop, watching his own father's hands. He had not realized how much of that wonder had become simple routine over the years. Seeing it reflected in Lily's eyes made it new again. Time, which was usually so precisely measured in this room, seemed to slip away unnoticed. The tea grew cold in their cups. The electric heater hummed its warm, steady tune. Outside, the rain began to soften. The heavy patter on the awning eased into a gentle drumming, and then a whisper. A pale, watery light began to filter through the clouds, pushing back the deep gray. Eleanor glanced at the window. "Oh, look," she said. "I think it's stopping." They all looked. The steady stream of water running down the glass had slowed to a few hesitant trickles. The view of the square was becoming clearer. The deep puddles were no longer being stirred by falling drops, their surfaces now like dark mirrors reflecting the brightening sky. And then, as if on cue, a single, brilliant ray of sunshine broke through the clouds. It sliced through the damp air and struck the wet cobblestones of the square, making them steam and sparkle. It was a dramatic, theatrical entrance. "Oh, wow," Lily breathed, pressing her nose against the glass. Following the path of the sunbeam, another marvel was unfolding. A rainbow, faint at first, then growing in strength and vibrancy, began to arch across the sky above the village roofs. Its colors were impossibly bright against the dark, retreating clouds. A perfect painted arc of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. The sight held them all silent for a moment. It was a gift, a quiet promise after the long, gray afternoon. The light from the rainbow seemed to fill the shop, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the brass and wood of the clocks, making them gleam. Eleanor stood up, a reluctant movement. "Well," she said softly, "I suppose we should be on our way before it starts again. Thank you for everything. The shelter, the tea, the eye surgery." She smiled warmly at Arthur. "It was my pleasure," Arthur said, and he was surprised by how much he meant it. The thought of them leaving brought a small, unexpected pang of disappointment. The shop would be quiet again. Eleanor helped Lily back into her yellow raincoat, which was now mostly dry. Lily clutched Barnaby, whose new eyes stared out at the world with a fixed and sturdy confidence. She walked over to Arthur and stood before him, looking up with her serious brown eyes. "Thank you for the milk in the rabbit cup, Mr. Clockman," she said formally. "You are most welcome, Lily," he replied, squatting down so he was at her level. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and gave his hand a quick, shy squeeze with her small, warm one. Then she turned and ran to her mother's side by the door. "Goodbye," Eleanor said, opening the door. The little bell jingled its farewell. The air that drifted in was no longer cold and damp, but fresh, clean, and smelling of wet grass and renewed earth. "Goodbye," Arthur said, standing in the doorway. He watched them walk out into the now sunny square. The rainbow was still there, a brilliant banner in the sky. Lily turned once and waved, a flash of yellow against the glistening gray stones. Arthur waved back. He watched until they had crossed the square and disappeared down the lane from which they had first appeared. He stood there for a long time under his awning, looking at the empty square. It was quiet again. The pigeons were returning, cooing and strutting in the puddles, their feathers iridescent in the sunlight. The baker came out of his shop to breathe the fresh air. The world was slowly returning to its normal rhythm. Arthur finally turned and went back inside, closing the door gently behind him. The bell gave a soft, final jingle. He was alone again in his world of ticking clocks. But something was different. The quiet was not the same. It was not an empty quiet anymore. It was a peaceful quiet, resonating with the faint, happy echoes of the last hour. The air seemed warmer, the light softer. The ticking of the clocks no longer sounded like the lonely marking of empty moments. It sounded like a gentle, steady heartbeat. The heartbeat of a room that had been filled with unexpected life. He walked over to the table and collected the used mugs. The small one with the faded rabbit on it felt warm in his hands. He looked at it for a long moment before taking it back to the kitchenette to wash it. He did not put it back on the high shelf. He left it on the draining board where he could see it. He returned to his workbench. The pocket watch lay there, its intricate insides gleaming under the lamp, waiting patiently. Next to it, on the worn leather surface, was a single stray strand of black thread from Barnaby's operation. Arthur picked it up and smiled to himself. He did not brush it away. He wound it carefully around his little finger before tucking it safely into the corner of a small, empty drawer. A souvenir. He sat down on his stool, picked up his loupe, and prepared to return to his work. But, for a moment, he just sat there, listening. He listened to the rain dripping from the eaves outside. He listened to the gentle symphony of his clocks, and he thought about the difference between being alone and being lonely. He had been alone for much of his life, and he had been content. But he realized now that a small, gray film of loneliness had settled over him without his noticing, like a fine layer of dust on an unused clock. Today, a small girl in a yellow coat and her kind mother had blown that dust away. They had reminded him that time was not just something to be measured and contained in a metal case. It was something to be shared. The moments that mattered most were not the ones that ticked by in solitude, but the ones that were filled with the warmth of a shared cup of tea, the sound of a child's laughter, and the quiet satisfaction of mending a beloved toy. The sun began to set, and the light in the square turned to a soft, liquid gold. The rainbow had faded, leaving behind a sky washed clean and pale. Arthur did not turn on the main lights in his shop. He sat in the warm glow of his single workbench lamp, the rest of the room falling into a comfortable, shadowy peace. The faces of the clocks gleamed in the dimness, their hands sweeping in their endless, silent dance. He picked up his tweezers. He looked through his loop at the tiny, mechanical city of the watch, and as he gently nudged the final piece into place, the watch's balance wheel gave a tiny shudder and then began to oscillate back and forth, back and forth. A tiny, rapid heartbeat. Tick, 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 tick. The watch was alive again. A deep, profound contentment settled over Arthur Pumble. He closed the back of the watch, the click of the metal soft and satisfying. He held it to his ear, listening to its steady, restored rhythm. It was a good sound, a sound of purpose and of time moving forward, filled with possibility. The shop was quiet. The village was quiet. And in the heart of that quiet, Arthur felt perfectly, peacefully at home. The rain was gone, but its gift remained, a memory of warmth, a feeling of connection, and the gentle, reassuring knowledge that, even on the grayest of days, a little light can find its way in. And now, my friend, it is time for you to drift away into your own peaceful dreams, feeling safe, warm, and content. Sleep well. Hello, my friend. Welcome to your sleep story. My name is Cillian O'Connor, and I am an Irish storyteller. It is my honor to be your guide tonight on a journey into rest. Before we begin our tale, I wanted to share a little something with you. The other day, I found myself walking through a part of the city I rarely visit, and a sudden downpour sent me scurrying for shelter. I ducked into the first open doorway I saw, which happened to belong to a tiny old bookshop. The air inside was thick with the scent of aging paper and leather, and dust motes danced in the single beam of light from a high window. It was so quiet, so peaceful. It felt like a little pocket of stillness in the busy world. That feeling of finding a quiet haven, a place filled with sleeping stories, is what inspired the tale I have for you tonight. It is a story about a small, snowbound town and a library that holds a quiet secret. It is a tale about finding connection in the most peaceful of places, about the magic that exists in the stillness, waiting for a gentle heart to notice it. There is nothing to do now but listen. Nothing to do but allow my voice to be a gentle companion as you drift toward sleep. So let us begin our journey into relaxation. We will start, as we always do, by letting go of the day. We will count down together from 10, and with each number we will sink a little deeper into comfort, a little closer to peace. Find your comfortable position. Let your body feel heavy and supported. Notice the gentle weight of the blankets, the softness of the pillow beneath your head. There is nowhere else you need to be. This time is for you. Let us begin at 10. 10. Feel the solid surface beneath you. The bed, the couch, the floor. It is holding you completely. Feel the support of the earth itself, strong and steady beneath it all. You are safe. You are held. There is a quiet strength in this stillness, and you can borrow as much of it as you need. Let your body release into that support. Let it go. 9. Let my voice be a kind guide, a gentle friend sitting with you in the quiet. There's no judgment here, no expectation, only a soft and steady presence to accompany you. You are not alone on this journey. Allow the sound of my words to wash over you like a gentle tide, carrying away any tension, any worry. You are safe here. 8. Bring your awareness to your breath. Without changing a thing, simply notice the air flowing in and out. A cool, gentle stream as you inhale, and a warm, soft release as you exhale. Now, let us take a slow, deep breath together. In through your nose, filling your belly, your ribs, your chest. Hold it for just a moment. And now, a long, slow sigh out through your mouth. Soft sigh. Feel the release. Feel your shoulders drop. Feel the tiny muscles around your eyes soften. Let's do that once more. A deep, nourishing breath in, and a complete, gentle breath out. 7. Thoughts may come and go. That is their nature. Do not try to fight them or push them away. Simply acknowledge them and then let them drift on by. Imagine them as leaves floating on a moonlit river, carried gently away by the current, disappearing into the soft darkness. Your mind does not need to be busy right now. Its work for the day is done. You can give it permission to be quiet, to be still, thoughts passing like clouds through a starlit sky. 6. Reinforce this moment. This moment is for rest. Nowhere to be now. Nowhere to go. No obligations to fulfill. No problems to solve. All of that can wait for the light of a new day. For now, there's only the quiet of this room, the comfort of your bed, and the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Whatever has been, has been. Whatever will be, will be. Right now, there's only this peaceful present. 5. Connect with the feeling of peace that already exists within you. It is always there, like a calm, still pool deep inside. Sometimes the surface gets stirred up by the winds of the day, but the deep stillness is never truly gone. Let yourself sink down into that quiet inner place. It is your anchor, your sanctuary, a constant, accessible friend waiting for you to return. 4. Allow a gentle feeling of gratitude to arise. It doesn't need to be for anything grand. Gratitude for the simple things. Gratitude for this warm, safe place to rest. Gratitude for the body that carries you through your life. Gratitude for the simple, quiet act of breathing. Let this soft warmth of appreciation fill you, a gentle glow from the inside out. 3. Let your imagination begin to awaken. We are about to embark on a story, and you're invited to visualize it in whatever way feels most restful to you. Begin to imagine a soft, quiet landscape. Picture gentle, heavy flakes of snow falling from a dark sky. See them blanketing a small sleeping town. A town nestled in a quiet valley, surrounded by tall, dark pine trees whose branches are heavy with white. 2. Let us do one final, gentle scan of your body. Start at the tips of your toes and slowly move your awareness upward. As you go, invite any last remaining tension to dissolve, to melt away like snowflakes on a warm hearth. Your feet, your ankles, your calves, soft and heavy, your knees, your thighs, your hips, completely relaxed. Your belly, your chest, your back, sinking into the surface beneath you. Your shoulders released, your arms, your hands, your fingers, limp and still. Your neck, your jaw, your face, smooth and serene. Your whole body is now in a state of deep and profound rest. And 1. Completely letting go. Let go of the numbers. Let go of the effort. Let go of everything. All you need to do is float and drift and listen as our story begins. The town of Silverwood Creek was not a place one arrived at by accident. It was nestled deep in a valley, a place the main highway had long ago decided to bypass in favor of a more direct route through the mountains. To get there, you had to take a winding side road that followed the curves of a frozen river, a road that in winter often felt more like a suggestion than a promise. Tonight, that suggestion was almost entirely buried. Snow had been falling for 2 days straight, a silent, steady, and determined descent of flakes so large and perfect they looked as if they had been cut from paper by a careful hand. It was a snow that didn't just cover the world, it transformed it. It rounded every sharp edge, softened every harsh line, and draped the entire valley in a thick, sound-absorbing blanket of pure white. The houses of Silverwood Creek were dark, their windows like sleepy, closed eyes. Chimneys puffed out soft plumes of gray smoke that rose for a moment before dissolving into the snowy air like old men clearing their throats in the cold. The only real light came from the old-fashioned street lamps that lined the single main street, their amber glow casting long, soft shadows on the untouched drifts below. The world was hushed, muffled, as if holding its breath. The only sound was the almost imperceptible whisper of more snow falling on yet more snow. At the very heart of the town, standing solid and dependable as a mountain itself, was the public library. It was a building of dark gray stone, with a steeply pitched roof to shed the heavy snows and tall, arched windows that looked out onto the town square. By day, it was a place of quiet bustle, the heart of the community. But now, well past midnight, it was an island of profound silence in a sea of white. Inside, a single light still burned. It came from a small, mullioned window on the second floor, in the apartment of Arthur Penhaligon, the town librarian. Arthur had been the librarian for 43 years. He had taken the job as a young man, thinking it a temporary post, a quiet place to read and think before moving on to grander things. But the quiet of the valley had seeped into his bones, and the rhythm of the library, the turning of pages, the whisper of patrons, the changing of the seasons outside the tall windows, had become the rhythm of his own life. He had never left. Arthur was a man made of the same quiet and dependable materials as the library itself. He was tall and spare, with a fringe of white hair that circled a kind, weathered face. His movements were slow and deliberate, born of a life spent among fragile things. Tonight, as he did every night, he was performing his closing ritual, a series of small, comforting actions that marked the end of his day. He stood in the main reading room, a grand space with a soaring ceiling from which a heavy iron chandelier hung, currently unlit. Moonlight, filtered through the snow-laden windows, gave the room a faint, ethereal glow, turning the long oak tables into dark, sleeping beasts. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and the faint, sweet scent of the wood smoke from his own fireplace upstairs. He ran a gentle hand along the spine of a book left on a table, its cover a deep, calming blue. He smiled softly. It was a collection of poetry by a writer he knew Mrs. Gable from the bakery adored. She must have been reading it this afternoon before the snow got too thick. He picked it up, the weight of it familiar and reassuring in his palm, and carried it back to the poetry section. His footsteps made no sound on the thick, worn rug that ran down the center of the room. He moved through the tall shelves, the stacks rising up around him like a silent, waiting forest. He knew this place better than he knew himself. He knew the creak of the third floorboard from the left in the history section. He knew which of the tall windows rattled when the west wind blew. He knew the precise spot on the shelf where this book of poetry belonged. He slid it into place, a perfect fit between a slim volume of sonnets and a heavy anthology. His fingers lingered for a moment on the spines of the other books, feeling the faint vibration of their silence. To Arthur, the library at night was not empty. It was full. It was full of sleeping stories, of dormant adventures and slumbering ideas, all waiting patiently for the morning to come, for a hand to reach out and wake them up. He continued his rounds. He walked past the children's corner, where tiny chairs were tucked neatly under tiny tables. A stuffed bear, left behind by a small visitor, sat propped against a shelf, its button eyes seeming to watch him with a friendly gaze. Arthur reached down and gently adjusted the bear's slightly crooked red bow. "There now," he whispered to the empty room, his voice a soft rasp. "All set." He checked the latch on the heavy oak front doors, running his palm over the cool, smooth brass. It was secure. He walked the perimeter of the ground floor, his eyes scanning the familiar landscape of his domain. Everything was in its proper place. The newspapers were folded neatly on their wooden racks. The returned books sat in an orderly queue on the cart behind the circulation desk, waiting to be reshelved in the morning. A sense of deep, abiding contentment settled over him. This was his world. It was a small world, a quiet world, but it was whole, and it was good. The snow falling outside only amplified the feeling of cozy sanctuary within these stone walls. The library was a ship, he sometimes thought, and he was its captain, navigating a silent sea of winter. His final task was to turn off the last remaining light, a small desk lamp he kept on at the circulation desk, its green glass shade casting a warm, welcoming pool of light on the dark wood. But as he reached for the switch, his eyes caught something out of place. On the corner of the large oak desk, a place he was certain had been empty just moments before, sat a book. It was not a book from his library. He was sure of that instantly. He knew every volume, every binding, every faded cover. This book was different. It was bound in a soft, dark leather that seemed to drink the light from the lamp. It was not black, nor was it brown, but some deep, indeterminate color in between, like a forest floor at dusk. There was no title on the cover, no lettering on the spine. It was completely unadorned, save for a simple, raised line that bordered the edges of the cover. Arthur frowned, a gentle creasing of the skin between his wide eyebrows. Where had this come from? No one had been in the library for hours. Not since old Mr. Henderson had braved the storm to return a book on gardening, muttering about planning for spring. Arthur had walked past this very desk not 10 minutes ago on his first sweep of the room, and the surface had been clear. He reached out a tentative hand and touched the cover. The leather was unexpectedly soft and warm, as if it had been sitting in the sun, though there had been no sun for days. It felt ancient, yet perfectly preserved. He picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, with a pleasing, solid weight. He ran his thumb over the smooth, unmarked spine. Curiosity, a gentle and pleasant feeling, stirred within him. He held the book in both hands, turning it over. There was no publisher's mark, no library stamp, no card pocket glued to the inside back cover. It was an orphan, a mystery. Perhaps someone had left it behind by mistake, though he couldn't imagine who. The people of Silverwood Creek were not prone to carrying around ancient-looking, untitled leather books. He stood there for a long moment in the quiet, cavernous room, the only sound the faint whisper of the wind against the tall windows. The book in his hands felt like a secret. A quiet question asked of the silent night, Instead of leaving it on the lost and found shelf, a different impulse took hold. He decided to take it upstairs with him. With the mysterious book tucked carefully under one arm, he finally switched off the green-shaded lamp. The main reading room plunged into a soft, moonlit darkness. The sleeping stories seemed to sigh around him as he turned and made his way towards the small private staircase at the back of the library that led to his home. Arthur's apartment was as much a part of the library as the shelves below. It was a cozy, cluttered space filled with more books, soft, worn armchairs, and the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. A small fire crackled and hissed in the stone fireplace, casting a warm, dancing light across the room. It was his haven, his nest, high above the sleeping town. He placed the mysterious book on a small round table next to his favorite armchair, the one with the indentation perfectly molded to his form after decades of use. He looked at it for a moment, its dark, silent form a stark contrast to the cheerful clutter of his own books and papers. It seemed to hold a stillness, a presence all its own. He went about his nightly routine, his movements slow and methodical. He filled a kettle with water and placed it on the small stove in his kitchenette. While he waited for it to boil, he went to the window and looked out at the snow. It was still falling, a relentless, gentle curtain of white. The town square below was a pristine, untouched canvas. The world felt brand new, buried under a layer of pure silence. The kettle began to whistle, a cheerful, piercing sound in the quiet apartment. He made himself a cup of chamomile tea, the fragrant steam rising to mist his spectacles. He added a single drop of honey and stirred it with a small silver spoon that had belonged to his mother. The clinking of the spoon against the ceramic mug was a small, comforting percussion in the vast silence of the night. Carrying his tea, he settled into his armchair by the fire. The warmth of the flames felt good on his face. He wrapped his hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into his fingers. For a while, he just sat, sipping his tea, listening to the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the snow against the window pane. This was the part of the day he loved most. The world was shut out, and his small, warm refuge felt like the safest place on earth. Finally, his gaze returned to the book on the table beside him. The firelight flickered across its dark leather cover, making the shadows shift and dance. The mystery of it was a pleasant puzzle, a small, unexpected wrinkle in the smooth fabric of his quiet life. He reached for it, his curiosity getting the better of him. He settled the book in his lap. It felt solid, real. He ran his hand over the cover one more time, then, with a sense of gentle anticipation, he opened it. He expected to see a title page, perhaps some faded handwritten inscription. He expected to see pages filled with dense, old-fashioned type. What he saw was nothing. The pages were blank. He blinked, leaning closer to the firelight. He turned the first page, and the next, and the next. Every single page was a smooth, creamy expanse of high-quality parchment, completely unmarked. There was no ink, no print, no illustration. Nothing. From cover to cover, it was an empty vessel. A soft sigh of disappointment escaped him. It was just a journal, then. An old, unused diary that someone had lost. The mystery dissolved, leaving behind a faint residue of melancholy. A book with no story. It seemed a sad thing to him. He gently closed the cover. He placed the book back on the table, its purpose now seemingly mundane. His tea was finished. The fire was burning low, collapsing into a bed of glowing orange embers. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed once, a single resonant note that marked half past the hour. It was time for bed. He banked the fire, pushing the embers into a neat pile and covering them with ash, a task performed so many times it was pure muscle memory. He tidied the few papers on his desk, wound the clock, and prepared for sleep. His bedroom was a small, simple room with a large window that looked out over the snow-covered rooftops of the town. Before climbing into his bed, he stood at the window for a long time, watching the snow. The world seemed so peaceful, so deeply asleep under its white blanket. He felt a familiar pang, a feeling that was not quite loneliness, but a close cousin to it. It was a sense of profound solitude, of being a quiet observer of a world that was turning without him. He was not unhappy. He was content. But his life was a circle of one, and sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the night, he felt its smallness. He finally pulled the curtains, climbed into his bed, and switched off his bedside lamp. The room fell into a comfortable darkness. The only light, a faint gray filtering in around the edges of the curtains. He closed his eyes, his mind quiet, and listened to the steady, rhythmic ticking of the clock in the other room, a sound that had lulled him to sleep for more than 40 years. Sleep came to him easily, as it always did, a gentle tide pulling him out from the shore of the waking world. Some time later, in the deepest, most silent part of the night, something shifted, a change in the quality of the darkness. Arthur stirred in his sleep, his subconscious mind registering a faint, unfamiliar light. He rolled over, pulling the blankets tighter, trying to sink back into the depths of his dream. But the light persisted, a soft, gentle glow that seemed to be coming from his living room. With a soft groan, he slowly surfaced from sleep. He opened his eyes. A thin line of silvery light was visible under his bedroom door. It was not the harsh yellow light of one of his lamps. It was a cool, gentle luminescence, like captured moonlight. For a moment, he wondered if he had forgotten to close the curtains properly, and the moon had come out from behind the clouds. But this light was different. It seemed to pulse, very, very slowly, like a soft heartbeat. He sat up in bed, his heart beating a little faster now, not with fear, but with a deep and profound curiosity. He swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet meeting the cold wood of the floor. He fumbled for his dressing gown, shrugging its familiar weight onto his shoulders, and padded softly to the door. He opened it a crack and peered out. The living room was bathed in a soft, silver-white light. It was not bright, but it filled the space with a gentle radiance, making the familiar shapes of his furniture look strange and magical. The source of the light was the small round table next to his armchair. It was the book. The blank book was lying open on the table, and it was from its pages that the light was emanating. It glowed with a soft, internal luminescence, a light that seemed to come from the very fibers of the parchment. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He pushed the door open wider and stepped silently into the room. The air felt different, charged with a quiet energy. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to have faded into the background. He approached the table slowly, as if not to frighten a timid creature. As he drew closer, he could see that the pages were no longer blank. Words were appearing on the page. They were not being written by any visible hand. They simply bloomed. They flowed onto the parchment like silver ink rising from some invisible spring, forming elegant lupin script. The words shimmered for a moment as they formed, then settled into the page, clear and bright. Arthur leaned over the book, his hands gripping the back of his armchair for support. He began to read. The book was not telling a single story. It was telling the story of the library in that very moment. It was writing about the deep, dreamless sleep of the books in the history section, their pages filled with dates and facts, all resting in the profound silence of the past. It described the way the moonlight, now breaking through the clouds, was striking a high window and sending a single silver beam down to illuminate the dust motes dancing in the cold air of the main reading room. He watched, mesmerized, as a new paragraph began to form. It spoke of the children's corner and the little stuffed bear with the crooked red bow. The book wrote of the bear's quiet vigil, how it stood guard over the colorful picture books, its button eyes holding the memory of the small, warm hands that had hugged it so tightly that afternoon. It wrote of the faint, lingering scent of cinnamon from the cookie the child had been eating, a ghost of a scent that still clung to the bear's fuzzy ear. Arthur felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was impossible. It was magic, but it felt as real and as solid as the chair beneath his hands. He sank into the armchair, his eyes never leaving the glowing pages. The book continued its silent, luminous narration. It turned its attention to the town outside. It wrote of the snow, describing each individual flake's journey from the high, cold clouds to its final resting place on a pine bough or a silent rooftop. It spoke of the baker, Mr. Gable, asleep in his bed, dreaming of new recipes for sourdough bread, his hands twitching slightly as if kneading dough in his sleep. It wrote of the Henderson house at the edge of town, where the book on gardening now sat on a bedside table. It described how Mr. Henderson, unable to sleep, had turned on his lamp and was now sketching plans for his rose garden, the colorful diagrams a bold act of faith in a spring that seemed a lifetime away. The book captured his quiet hope, his patient certainty that the green world would return from beneath the white. The pages turned on their own, a slow, rustling sound in the silent room. A new page began to fill with the silvery script. This time, it wrote of the library itself, of the old stone from which it was built. It told a story of the quarry from which the stone was cut 100 years ago, and of the masons who had shaped it, their hands calloused and strong. It wrote of the memory held within the stone, the memory of summer sun and winter frosts, of the voices and footsteps of generations of townspeople who had passed through its doors. Arthur felt as though he was seeing his home, his life's work, for the very first time. He was not just a librarian, a caretaker of paper and ink. He was the guardian of a living place, a place that held the dreams, the histories, and the quiet hopes of his entire community. The book was showing him the invisible threads that connected everything, the baker's dream to the farmer's field, the gardener's hope to the seasons, the child's forgotten toy to the memory of joy. He read for what felt like hours. The book showed him the story of a specific book, a worn copy of Moby Dick on the third shelf. It told of its previous readers. A young boy who had read it with a flashlight under his covers, dreaming of adventure on the high seas. A young woman who had read it on a train, finding in its pages a solace for her own restless heart. An old fisherman who had read it and seen the truth of the sea he knew so well. All those lives, all those moments, were somehow held within its pages, and the magical book was making them visible. The book wrote about him. It described a quiet man in a worn dressing gown sitting by a dying fire, his face illuminated by a gentle silver light. It wrote of his 43 years of faithful service, of the care he took in mending a torn page, of the gentle smile he offered a shy child. It wrote of his quiet solitude, not as a lack, not as a loneliness, but as a deep, watchful stillness. It saw him, and it did not judge. It simply recorded. It honored his quiet life by making it a part of the library's larger story. A single, warm tear traced a path down Arthur's weathered cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of a profound and overwhelming sense of connection. The feeling of smallness he sometimes felt in the vast, quiet night was gone. In its place was a sense of belonging so deep it felt as if the roots of the old building had grown right into his heart. He was a part of this place, and it was a part of him. He was not alone. He was surrounded by a million sleeping stories, and tonight they had woken up to speak to him. He watched as the script began to slow. The silvery light from the pages began to soften, to fade. The book wrote one final sentence, and now the quiet world waits for the dawn. As the last word settled into the page, the light flickered once and then went out. The book was just a book again, its pages no longer glowing, the words now just faint, silvery marks on the creamy parchment. The room returned to its familiar, fire-lit dimness. The ticking of the grandfather clock reasserted itself, its steady rhythm a comforting return to the ordinary. Arthur sat in the silence for a long time, his hand resting on the closed cover of the book. The leather was cool to the touch now. The magic had receded, but the feeling it had left behind remained. It was a deep, quiet joy, a sense of peace that settled into his very bones. He looked around his small, cozy apartment. It was the same room, but it felt different. It felt fuller. He felt as though the spirits of all the stories he had just read were there with him, a company of quiet, friendly ghosts. The house was not just a shelter, it was a repository of life. Slowly, as the first faint hint of gray began to lighten the edges of the window curtains, he stood up. He picked up the book, holding it carefully in both hands. He knew what he had to do with it. It did not belong to him. It belonged to the library. He carried it downstairs, his bare feet silent on the wooden steps. He walked through the main reading room, which was now filled with the soft, pre-dawn light. The room did not feel empty. It felt expectant, waiting. He went behind the main circulation desk to a small locked cabinet where he kept the oldest, most fragile books of the library's collection. He unlocked it with a small brass key he wore on a chain around his neck. He cleared a space on the top shelf, a place of honor. He gently placed the book there, its dark, unmarked spine facing outward. It looked perfectly at home among the other old volumes. He stood for a moment, looking at it, then softly closed and locked the cabinet door. It was a secret now, a quiet promise between him and the heart of his library. He went back upstairs, not to sleep, but to watch the day arrive. He made himself a fresh cup of tea, but this time it was a strong black tea, a welcome to the morning. He sat in his armchair, not by the fire, but by the window, and pulled back the curtains. The snow had finally stopped. The world outside was a masterpiece of white and shadow. The sky was a pale, soft lilac, and the tops of the pine trees were tinged with a rosy pink from the approaching sun. As he watched, the sun itself crested the ridge of the eastern mountains, and the entire valley was flooded with a brilliant golden light. The fresh snow sparkled as if it were scattered with millions of tiny diamonds. The air was clean and cold and new. Down below, the town began to stir. A plume of smoke, thicker now, rose from the bakery's chimney. The distant, rumbling groan of the town's only snowplow began its work at the far end of Main Street. A door opened, and someone emerged, their dark coat a stark figure against the brilliant white, beginning the task of shoveling a path. The world was waking up, and Arthur felt as if he were waking up with it. The quiet solitude of his life had not changed, but his perception of it had been transformed. It was not an empty solitude, but a full one, a watchfulness, a guardianship. He followed his morning routine as always. He dressed, he ate his toast and marmalade, he read the headlines of yesterday's paper, but everything he did felt infused with a new sense of meaning. When he went downstairs to prepare the library for opening, he moved with a lighter step. He unlocked the great oak doors. He switched on the lights, and the main reading room glowed with a warm, welcoming light. He reshelved the books from the return cart, and as he slid each one into its place, he thought of the stories it held, not just the ones printed on its pages, but the stories of its readers, the lives it had touched. He put on a fresh pot of coffee in the small break room, the rich aroma filling the air. He straightened the tiny chairs in the children's corner and gave the stuffed bear a little pat on the head. He was not just tidying a room. He was preparing a sanctuary. At precisely 9 o'clock, he turned the sign on the front door from closed to open. He stood by the door for a moment, looking out at the bright, snowy town. The world felt clean and full of possibility. A few minutes later, his first visitor of the day arrived. It was young Lily, Mrs. Gable's granddaughter, her face rosy from the cold, her boots caked with snow. She held her grandmother's hand, her eyes wide with the wonder of the transformed world. "Good morning, Arthur," Mrs. Gable said, her voice warm. "Good morning, Eleanor." "Good morning, Lily," Arthur replied, and the smile that spread across his face was different than his usual quiet, polite smile. It was radiant. It was a smile that held a secret knowledge of the magic that slept on the shelves all around them. A smile that knew that even in the quietest corners of the world, on the coldest of winter nights, the most wonderful stories were always waiting to be read. He felt a quiet, simple joy, as bright and as clean as the new morning snow. The library was awake, and so was he. And now, as Arthur's day begins, your night can deepen. Let the feeling of peace and quiet joy from the story settle over you. The library is safe. The town is waking up to a beautiful, clean morning. All is well. There's nothing left to do now but to drift, to dream, to sleep. Sleep now, my friend. Sleep.